There was a time in David's life when silence was louder than noise. Not the peaceful kind of silence, but the heavy, suffocating kind that follows after a dream has died. He was in his late 30s. A former startup founder once hailed as the next big thing in the tech world. Now sitting in a quiet apartment in San Francisco, watching dust particles float in the morning light. His company had collapsed 2 years ago after a string of poor decisions and the betrayal of someone he once called a friend. In the aftermath, David had lost more than just money. He lost his identity. Every pitch, every investor meeting, every long night spent building a product, gone. All that remained was an echo. Who am I now? But something strange began to happen. It started subtly, almost playfully. A book he'd never bought appeared on his nightstand one morning, The Alchemist, by Paulo Coelho. At first, he dismissed it, thinking it was left by a guest or maybe delivered by mistake. Still, he opened it. On page 22, a quote leapt out at him: "When you want something, all the universe conspires in helping you to achieve it." He laughed, bitterly. What universe? Where was this conspiracy when he needed it most? But then, the signs kept coming. On a walk one afternoon, lost in thought, he bumped into an elderly woman at the park. She looked at him, eyes calm and oddly knowing, and said, "You're not lost, you're being redirected." He froze. He hadn't told her anything. The next day, a song played on the radio, a song his mother used to sing when he was a child. He hadn't heard it in 20 years. The lyrics seemed to speak directly to his heart, as if someone had programmed it just for that moment. Still, he wasn't ready to believe. But slowly, a pattern began to emerge, one that made him question whether all these coincidences were just random. Or were they something more? Were these signs from above? Was someone, or something, trying to guide him? This is the story of how David uncovered the unseen threads weaving through his life. It is not just a tale of redemption, but of awakening, a journey from skepticism to surrender, from chaos to clarity, and perhaps, through his story, you'll begin to see the signs in your own life. David sat in his usual spot by the window, a steaming mug of black coffee in his hands, watching the rain tap gently against the glass. San Francisco had a certain melancholy when it rained, like the city itself was remembering things it had forgotten. He had always loved that about it. But today, the rain felt different. It wasn't just washing the streets clean. It was trying to wash something off him, grief, maybe, or the past. The old woman's words had stuck with him. You're not lost. You're being redirected. They echoed in his head during the quiet hours, resurfacing in dreams and during walks through Golden Gate Park. He told himself it was just a strange coincidence. But part of him wasn't so sure anymore. He opened a notebook he hadn't touched in months and began to write. If there is something out there guiding me, then I need to understand how to listen. If these are signs, then I want to recognize them. I want to follow them. The page stayed blank for a moment after he wrote that. Something shifted. He could feel it, not outside, but within. A tiny ember, warm and alive, flickered in his chest. Hope, maybe. That afternoon, he decided to visit the bookstore down the street. He wasn't sure why. He wasn't even looking for anything in particular. But as he wandered through the aisles, his hand paused on a book titled The Language of Signs. He picked it up, flipped to a random page, and read, "The divine often speaks in patterns, repeated numbers, unexpected meetings, dreams, songs. These are not coincidences, they are conversation." He stood frozen, goosebumps rising on his arms. It was as if the book had been waiting for him. Later that night, David sat on his couch with the book open on his lap. He began reading it like a manual, trying to decipher this strange language of the universe. The author spoke of the subconscious mind, synchronicities, and divine breadcrumbs that could lead us to our higher path if we were only awake enough to follow them. He looked back on the last few weeks, the book on his nightstand, the elderly woman, the song on the radio. What if they weren't random? The next morning, something even stranger happened. David had a dream, a vivid, lifelike one. In it, he was walking through a desert, lost and exhausted, just as he was about to collapse. A figure appeared on the horizon. The figure wore white and glowed faintly, like the sunlight had taken human form. Without speaking, the figure pointed to the left, toward a path David hadn't noticed before. He woke up with the image burned into his mind. It felt important. Was it just a dream? Or another sign? He scribbled it down in his notebook, adding it to his growing list of strange occurrences. He labeled them messages. That day, he went out walking, unsure of where he was headed. He wandered through the Mission District, past colorful murals and tiny family-run cafes. As he rounded a corner, he stopped in his tracks. Painted on the side of a building was a massive mural, one he had never seen before. Even though he had walked that street 100 times, it depicted a man in the desert, standing before a glowing figure in white. Just like his dream, his heart pounded. His first instinct was to pull out his phone and take a picture. But something told him not to. Just see it, feel it, and he did. Tears welled up in his eyes. That evening, David sat with his journal again, hands shaking slightly as he wrote. I think something is happening to me. Not outside, inside. Something is waking up. I've been so angry for so long, so lost, but maybe I needed to be lost, to be found again. He began researching synchronicity, Carl Jung's term for meaningful coincidences. He read about intuition, divine timing, and stories from people who felt they were guided by unseen forces at their lowest points. The more he read, the less alone he felt. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like a failure. He felt chosen, not in a grandiose way, but gently, as if some ancient intelligence was whispering, "You're on the right path now. Just keep going." He decided to test this idea, to live as if the signs were real. To trust them. That trust would soon be tested in ways he couldn't yet imagine. In the days that followed, David began to notice that life had a rhythm, a quiet choreography he had never paid attention to before. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was subtle, like a breeze brushing past your skin just before you make a decision. Or a flicker of warmth in your chest when you say yes to the right thing. He began saying yes more often. Yes to walks without a destination. Yes to spontaneous conversations. Yes to letting go of needing to know what comes next. One Thursday morning, he found himself drawn to a small cafe he'd never entered before. It wasn't the coffee or the menu that called him, it was something else. Something he couldn't name. He ordered a tea, sat near the window, and pulled out his notebook. He was halfway through jotting down another dream when a voice interrupted him. "You're writing a story, aren't you?" asked a woman with auburn hair and a warm, open smile. She looked to be in her early 40s and held a cup of chamomile tea. David blinked, surprised. Not exactly, more like a map of sorts. She tilted her head, curious. A map of what? He hesitated. He had only recently allowed himself to believe in science. Sharing it out loud felt almost too raw. But something about her energy felt safe. A map of signs, messages, moments that feel like they mean something, even if I don't fully understand them. The woman smiled wider, as if she'd been waiting for that answer. "Ah, you're following the thread." David raised an eyebrow. "The thread? It's an old metaphor," she said, setting her tea down. "Some say the soul has a thread it follows through this life. The thread gets tangled sometimes. We lose it, forget we're even holding it. But when we find it again, when we pay attention, things start to make sense." Little by little, he was stunned. This wasn't just a stranger. This was another breadcrumb. Her name was Evelyn. She was an intuitive counselor, not someone who predicted the future. She was quick to clarify, but someone who helped people listen to themselves, to the universe, to whatever they believed was out there. They spoke for nearly 2 hours. David shared his dreams, the mural, the book on his nightstand. Evelyn nodded, not surprised. "I think you're being invited into alignment," she said softly, "into remembering." That night, David lay awake staring at the ceiling, her words replaying in his mind, remembering. It struck him deeply, not discovering, not inventing, but remembering, as if he had always known this language of science. This divine connection, but had simply forgotten it. He began practicing presence more intentionally. He meditated, awkwardly at first. Then, with increasing comfort, he stopped listening to podcasts about productivity and started listening to silence. It was hard. His mind resisted. It shouted reminders of failure, doubts, deadlines, but slowly, beneath that noise, he found stillness. In that stillness, the signs grew louder. One afternoon, while journaling under a tree in the park, a feather fell into his lap, white, perfectly intact. He laughed out loud. He didn't know why it made him feel so seen, but it did. Later, He looked up the symbolism. In many cultures, a white feather represents angels, divine presence, encouragement to keep going. David was starting to trust, not blindly, but with curiosity. The transformation wasn't instant. He still had bad days. He still woke up sometimes filled with doubt. But now, he had tools, patterns, practices. He was learning how to live in partnership with the unseen. About a week later, Evelyn invited him to a small spiritual gathering. Not a religious service, something more like a circle. A group of 10 people, each on their own path, came together in a softly lit room. Seated on cushions, there was incense, music, and gentle conversation. Each person shared a moment in their life where they felt guided. Some were dramatic, narrowly missing a car crash after a sudden gut feeling. Others were quiet, like a decision to call someone right before they were about to do something irreversible. David listened, heart wide open, when it was his turn. He spoke slowly, told him about the collapse of his company, the sense of being abandoned by life, and then the signs, the book, the woman, the mural, the dream. When he finished, the room was silent for a moment. Then one of the older men in the circle leaned forward and said, "Sometimes, when our plans fall apart, it's because the soul's plan is finally beginning." David's throat tightened. He didn't realize how deeply he had needed to hear that. The weeks that followed were not easy. David felt like he was walking a thin line between faith and fear. Each day brought new signs, but with them came doubts, old habits, old fears that clawed at him, whispering that maybe all of this was just wishful thinking. Maybe the universe wasn't sending him messages. Maybe he was just seeing what he wanted to see. But then, the signs came again. One evening, David found himself standing at a crossroad. His old company had been bought out by a competitor, something that seemed like a stroke of luck at first. But now, standing on the precipice of a new offer, it felt like the wrong choice. The job was comfortable, it was secure, it was everything he had once thought he wanted. And yet, it didn't sit right. He sat in his car, parked on a quiet street, feeling torn. The weight of his decision pressed down on him. Should he take the offer and return to the corporate world? Or should he follow this strange, intangible feeling that had been guiding him? Was it just fear of failure pulling him back into the comfort of familiarity? Or was it the universe telling him to hold out for something more? He closed his eyes and breathed deeply. And then, something happened. A bird flew past his window, just inches from the glass. A black crow, its wings slicing the air with precision. It flew in a perfect arc, swooping low, then high, before disappearing into the trees. David sat in silence, the hairs on the back of his neck standing up. He'd read once that crows were symbols of transformation, of change. He had seen him many times in his life, but never like this, never so close, never so deliberate. A voice, quiet but unmistakable, whispered in his mind, "You are at a crossroads. Choose wisely, but choose what resonates with your soul, not your fear." It felt like a warning, a call to remember what he had been learning. David's heart raced, and for the first time in weeks, he felt calm. He made a choice. He would not take the job. He would follow his instincts, trust the signs, and continue on the path of uncertainty. It wasn't easy. The next few days were filled with moments of second guessing, of calling his old colleagues to say goodbye, of wondering if he was making the biggest mistake of his life. But something inside him told him that the path less traveled was the one that would lead him to the life he was meant to live. Then, as if the universe was rewarding his faith, another sign appeared. It was a phone call from an unexpected source, an old mentor from his college years. Someone he hadn't spoken to in over a decade. The conversation started with pleasantries, but then the mentor dropped a bombshell. "David, I don't know why, but I've been thinking about you lately. I've got a project that I believe you'd be perfect for. It's risky, it's unconventional, but it's something that could change everything. I know it's exactly what you need right now." David felt his stomach flip. This was the moment he had been waiting for. He agreed to meet the next day. The following morning, David found himself in a small cafe, sitting across from his old mentor, Robert. The man had aged, his hair streaked with silver, but his presence still held the same energy as when David had been his student. Robert was a successful entrepreneur in his own right, but it was clear he had left behind the fast-paced corporate world for something deeper, something more meaningful. As they spoke, Robert's eyes gleamed with excitement. "David, I see something in you. You've been searching for purpose. I can tell, and I have a vision for a new kind of business, a business that goes beyond profit. A business that serves people and the planet. We don't have to keep running the race that everyone else is running. We can create something new, something real." David listened intently, his heart racing with a mix of disbelief and hope. This was it. This was the sign he had been waiting for. It was an opportunity to build something meaningful, something that aligned with the values he had rediscovered. But as the conversation continued, doubts crept in. What if this was just another distraction? What if he was fooling himself into believing in some grand cosmic plan, when all he needed was to get back to work, earn a paycheck, and rebuild his life? Robert's words cut through his thoughts. "David, you can follow the signs, but it takes courage to follow them. Sometimes, the path isn't clear. Sometimes, it's not about finding the easy way, it's about finding the right way." David knew in that moment that this was the test of faith, the test of whether he truly believed in the signs, in the guidance, or whether he would turn back to the comfort of the familiar, the known. That night, David sat in his apartment, staring at the city lights. His mind was racing. He had the power to change everything, to start something from scratch, but it required him to step into the unknown, to trust in something bigger than himself. He closed his eyes, breathed deeply, and asked for a sign, a clear, unmistakable sign that this was the right decision. And when he opened his eyes, a message appeared on his phone: "You've got this." It wasn't from anyone he knew. It was a random text, from a number he didn't recognize. David smiled. He knew what he had to do. David's first days after committing to Robert's project felt like stepping into a whirlwind. There was excitement, yes, but also an undercurrent of fear that he was jumping off a cliff with no parachute, no safety net to catch him if he fell. The security of the corporate world felt so far away now, almost like a dream. He'd walked away from a well-paid, stable job, an office with a view of the city, a routine that he had become accustomed to. In return, he had entered a world of ambiguity, uncertainty, and endless possibility. But it was a different kind of world, a world where he was building something real, something that had meaning beyond profit margins. The project Robert had described was ambitious. It wasn't about creating another tech startup to ride the wave of Silicon Valley's success. It was a venture that blended business with purpose, a sustainable business that focused on social impact, environmental responsibility, and ethical practices. Robert believed that the world didn't need more products, it needed better products. Products that could improve lives without destroying the planet. David wasn't sure where to begin. His past life had been about numbers, profits, deadlines, but this project was different. This was about creating something that would truly make a difference, something that would be in alignment with his growing sense of purpose. But how would they ever make this work? How would they convince others to follow their vision? The business world was tough, too many obstacles, too many people just in it for the money. Could he really make a living while sticking to his values? The first few months were a blur. David threw himself into the project with the same intensity he had once applied to his corporate work. But this time, it felt different. Every step, every decision was filled with meaning. Still, there were moments when doubt crept in, when he wondered if he was truly cut out for this. One night, after a particularly long day of meetings and phone calls, David sat in the office alone, looking at the proposal for their first major campaign. His hands shook as he read through the numbers. Was this really possible? Was there any way this vision could succeed in the current economic climate? That's when Robert called. David's mentor always seemed to know when he was on the verge of giving up. "David," Robert said with his characteristic calm voice, "I know it's hard. I know it feels like you're taking a leap of faith every single day. But listen to me, don't worry about the results right now. Focus on building something that matters. The world will catch up. If it's the right thing, it will work." David closed his eyes and leaned back in his chair. He had heard those words before, but now they had a deeper meaning. If it's the right thing, it will work. In the following weeks, David began to embrace the uncertainty. He stopped obsessing over outcomes and began to enjoy the process. He started reaching out to potential partners who shared their vision. He connected with environmental groups, ethical suppliers, and people who believed in creating positive change. It wasn't easy. There were a lot of setbacks, delays in production, problems with suppliers, and moments when it felt like the whole project might fall apart. But with each obstacle, David grew more resilient. He was learning to trust the process, trust the signs, and trust himself. Then, one day, they received a breakthrough. An investor, someone who had built a successful career in sustainable businesses, showed interest in their project. It wasn't the kind of investor who cared only about the bottom line. This investor shared their vision, believed in their mission, and saw the potential for impact. It was a turning point. The investment would allow them to scale their operations, to bring their products to market in a way that could truly make a difference. The relief David felt was palpable, but even more than that, it was a reaffirmation of everything he had been learning. The universe had been guiding him all along. His faith had been tested, and now, the signs were clearer than ever. David knew that this was just the beginning. There would be more challenges ahead, but for the first time in a long time, he felt ready. He was no longer afraid of the unknown. Instead, he was embracing it, trusting that the path would reveal itself. One step at a time. As the project began to gain momentum, David found himself more connected to his own sense of purpose than ever before. He no longer felt like he was chasing success. He was creating something that mattered, something that aligned with his values and his vision for a better world. He realized that the signs had never been about giving him all the answers. They were about showing him the way, step by step, and giving him the courage to keep moving forward, even when the path wasn't clear. David knew that the journey was far from over. There would be setbacks, challenges, and moments of doubt, but for the first time in his life, he didn't feel like he was in this alone. The signs, the guidance, the sense of something greater, it was all part of the process. And he was ready to embrace it. Months had passed since the turning point, since that phone call from the investor that had breathed new life into the project. David had poured himself into the work, as he always did, but this time, there was something different. He wasn't just working for a paycheck, for validation, or even for success. He was working because it felt right. The work had meaning now. It was fulfilling, and that sense of fulfillment filled him with energy and purpose like he had never known. As the business began to grow, so did David. He found himself surrounded by a team of like-minded individuals, each driven by the same vision. They weren't just employees, they were partners in this journey, all working toward a common goal. David realized that the project was no longer just his. It was bigger than him. It was a collective effort, a living, breathing entity that had the potential to create real change in the world. But even as things seemed to be falling into place, there were moments of doubt. Old habits crept in, doubts about whether he was doing enough, whether the project was progressing fast enough, whether he was making the right choices. He still didn't have all the answers, and sometimes, that scared him. One late evening, as he sat in his office reviewing some financial reports, a message pinged on his phone. It was from Evelyn, the woman he had met in the cafe all those months ago. Her message was simple: "How are you, David? I've been thinking about you lately. I'd love to catch up." David smiled. He hadn't spoken to her in a while, but he had carried her words with him every day. Follow the thread. Trust the process. The messages she had shared about aligning with his soul's purpose had resonated with him deeply. She had been one of the first to help him understand that this journey wasn't just about external success, it was about inner alignment, about finding peace with the choices he was making. He replied, agreeing to meet for coffee the next afternoon. The next day, they sat in the same cafe where they had first met. Evelyn looked the same, radiant, calm, as though she existed in a state of constant peace. David, on the other hand, was a little more frazzled, a little more worn, but there was something in him that had shifted. He wasn't the same man who had walked into this cafe all those months ago. "You look well," Evelyn said, her eyes soft with warmth. "How are things going?" David leaned back in his chair. The weight of everything he had been carrying felt lighter now. "Better than I could have ever imagined," he said, smiling. "The project's taking off. We've got great people working with us, and the response from the community has been amazing." Evelyn smiled, but there was something knowing in her gaze. "And how are you feeling about it all?" David paused. He had been so focused on the external success that he hadn't really stopped to think about how he felt on the inside. Sure, things were going well, but was he truly at peace? He sighed. "It's a lot. Sometimes I feel like I'm juggling so many things. trying to make sure everything aligns, that I forget why I started this journey in the first place. Evelyn nodded. And why did you start? David looked down at his coffee, thinking, I guess, I was looking for something more, something that wasn't just about profit or status. I wanted to create something meaningful, something that aligned with who I am. But now, I worry that in trying to make this work, I've lost touch with the why. Evelyn's voice was soft but firm. David, that why doesn't go anywhere. It's not something you have to chase. It's always there, but you have to be present enough to feel it. If you're constantly focused on the next step, the next goal, the next milestone, you'll miss the very thing you're trying to build. Her words landed with a deep resonance in David's heart. He realized that the reason he had been so overwhelmed wasn't because the project was too big, it was because he had been living for the outcome rather than the process. He had been chasing success, rather than living it. I've been so focused on building something that I forgot to be present in what I've already built. David said quietly. Evelyn smiled. Exactly, and the universe has a funny way of giving us little nudges to remind us. Your project, your journey, it's all part of your story. But don't forget to live the story. You're not just here to reach the end goal. You're here to experience every moment along the way. David sat back in his chair, a wave of realization washing over him. He had been so fixated on the external results that he had missed the beauty of the journey itself, the connections, the growth, the learning, and the peace that came with trusting the process. He felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude for the signs, for the guidance, for the people who had shown up along his path. He realized that this whole journey wasn't just about success or failure. It was about growth, transformation, and the alignment of his inner self with the world around him. As they said their goodbyes, Evelyn placed a hand on his shoulder. Trust the thread, David. It's leading you exactly where you need to go. David nodded, a quiet peace settling within him. He didn't have all the answers. He didn't need to. What he had was trust, the trust that the universe, the signs, and his own heart would continue to guide him. Step by step, walking out of the cafe, he looked up at the sky. It was a clear, crisp afternoon, and for the first time in a long time, David felt connected to everything around him. The journey was far from over, but he was no longer afraid of it. He was exactly where he needed to be. David stood at the edge of the terrace, gazing at the sunset. The sky was painted in hues of orange, pink, and purple, a canvas so beautiful it seemed surreal. It was a moment of stillness, a quiet reflection on how far he had come. He could feel the weight of the journey he had embarked on, the highs and the lows, the moments of clarity and doubt, and the times when he had questioned everything he thought he knew. But now, in this very moment, everything felt aligned. The world felt quiet, peaceful. He took a deep breath, inhaling the cool air, letting it fill his lungs. His mind was calm, and his heart was steady. In a way, this was the moment he had been working toward. Not a finish line or a monumental achievement, but a place of inner peace, of understanding. When he had first started this journey, it was out of a need for more meaning, more purpose, more fulfillment. He had been so tired of living a life based on external markers of success, job titles, income, status. They had never been enough. He had always felt that something was missing. And as he had followed the signs, trusting his instincts, he had discovered something profound. The real success was not in the results, but in the alignment with his true self. David had once been terrified of uncertainty. He had feared failure and loss, believing that without control, there was nothing. But the universe had shown him otherwise. It had guided him through the most uncertain of times, leading him to places he never thought possible. Through the signs, birds, numbers, messages, synchronicities, the universe had spoken to him, whispering that he was on the right path, even when he could not see the destination. He thought back to the first time he had seen the crow, the bird that had swooped past his car window, just inches from his face. At that moment, he had felt something shift within him, a deep recognition that he was standing at a crossroads. And while the choice ahead had been daunting, he had listened, trusting the quiet voice that had told him to move forward, even without knowing what lay beyond the horizon. That was the pivotal moment, the moment he had chosen faith over fear. And as he stood here now, on this terrace, with the sun setting before him, he realized just how far he had come. The project was thriving, yes, But the true success lay in the journey itself, the people he had met, the lessons he had learned, and the growth he had experienced within himself. David smiled softly to himself. He had come to understand that every challenge, every setback, every moment of doubt had been a necessary part of the process. They were all part of the story, all part of the unfolding path that had brought him here. He had learned that life was never about avoiding obstacles but about trusting that, with each step, he was exactly where he needed to be. The universe had never steered him wrong. He thought about Evelyn, her quiet wisdom, her unshakable belief in the unseen forces guiding their lives. When they had met in that cafe, she had told him to trust the thread and to allow the process to unfold. Her words had stayed with him, and now he understood them fully. Life wasn't a race. It wasn't a checklist of accomplishments or accolades. It was about showing up, being present, and allowing yourself to be guided by something greater than your own fear or doubt. In the early days, David had often looked for signs as if they were answers to all his questions. But now, he saw that the signs weren't meant to give him direct answers. They were meant to teach him to trust himself, to trust the unfolding of life, to trust that he was part of a larger plan, even when he couldn't see it all. The business was thriving, yes, but the people who had joined him on this journey, the ones who had believed in the mission, who had poured their hearts into the work, were more than just colleagues. They were a community. They were the manifestation of the very thing he had hoped to create, a world where purpose and profit could coexist, where success meant more than just financial gain. It was about impact, about leaving the world better than he had found it. David had come to understand that real fulfillment came not from the recognition or the success of the project, but from the deeper connections he had made along the way. It was about the people who had believed in him when he doubted himself, the partners who had shared his vision, the team who had worked tirelessly toward a common goal. It was about building something that would last, not just for him, but for the generations to come. As the sun dipped lower, casting a warm glow over the city, David thought about his personal journey, the road he had traveled from fear to faith, from doubt to trust. And in that quiet moment, with the universe stretching out before him, he knew that he had found something far more precious than success. He had found peace. It wasn't a destination he had reached. It was a way of being, a way of living in alignment with his true self, trusting the signs, and allowing life to unfold as it was meant to. David had learned that the most powerful thing you can do is to trust the process. Even when the road is unclear, to trust that the signs will come when you need them, and that the universe is always guiding you, even when you don't understand the way ahead. The universe, after all, doesn't give us all the answers at once. It gives us what we need, just when we need it. He closed his eyes, feeling the cool breeze on his face, and whispered a quiet thank you to the universe, for the signs, for the guidance, for the courage to trust. The journey had been hard, but it had been worth it. And as he stood there, on the edge of everything he had built, David knew that this was only the beginning. The signs would continue to come, the path would continue to unfold, and he would continue to walk it, step by step, with faith, trust, and gratitude in his heart.